My wife's maid of honor spent a decade erasing me from her life, so her husband and I made ourselves impossible to ignore. The first time Vanessa cropped me out of a photo, I thought it was an accident. We were at a beach house in Cape Cod for Diane's 30th birthday, and Vanessa posted dozens of pictures to Instagram. Every single one featured my wife front and center, surrounded by their college friends, all of them laughing and glowing in golden hour light. I appeared in exactly none of them, even though I'd been standing right next to Diane in most of the shots. I knew because I'd taken half of them myself before handing my phone to Vanessa so we could get some couples photos. When those appeared on her feed, I'd been carefully excised, leaving just Diane against the ocean backdrop, as if she'd been alone the whole weekend. I mentioned it to Diane that night as we drove home. She laughed it off, said Vanessa probably just liked the composition better with one person. But I'd seen the original photos on my phone, seen how Vanessa had zoomed and cropped and edited until I simply didn't exist. That was year 3 of our marriage. By year 5, the pattern was undeniable. At every dinner party Vanessa hosted, my chair would be positioned slightly apart from the table, like an afterthought. She'd remember everyone's dietary restrictions except mine, serving dishes I was allergic to without apology. When she told stories about our group trips or shared memories from the weekend getaways we'd all taken together, I was never part of the narrative. She'd say, "Diane and I went hiking in Vermont," when I'd been there too, carrying most of the gear. She'd reference that amazing restaurant we found in Portland, as if Diane had discovered it, when I'd made the reservation and driven us there through a snowstorm. Every anecdote, every shared memory, every inside joke was carefully constructed to exclude me. I'd be sitting right there at the table, holding my wife's hand, and Vanessa would recount our own experiences as if I'd never existed in them. Diane defended her every time I brought it up. "Vanessa's just particular about her aesthetic," she'd say when I pointed out another cropped photo. Or, "You're being too sensitive. She forgets things sometimes," when I'd mentioned being erased from a story. The most frustrating part was that Vanessa was never overtly rude to me. She'd smile when I entered a room, offer a perfunctory hug at gatherings, ask generic questions about work. But there was something hollow in her eyes when she looked at me, something that suggested I was an obstacle she was patiently working around. She treated me like a temporary inconvenience, someone who'd eventually disappear if she just ignored me long enough. And after a decade of this, I was starting to wonder if she was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I didn't belong in Diane's world the way Vanessa did. They'd been inseparable since freshman year of college, had matching tattoos, knew each other's coffee orders and childhood traumas and secret fears. What did I have? 7 years of marriage and a growing suspicion that my wife saw me the same way her best friend did, as someone who existed on the periphery of what really mattered. The breaking point came at our 10th anniversary party. Diane wanted something big, something that celebrated the life we'd built together, so we rented out a rooftop venue downtown and invited everyone who mattered to us. I spent weeks planning, coordinating with the caterer, designing the invitations, creating a slideshow of photos from our relationship. Vanessa had volunteered to help, and Diane was thrilled to have her maid of honor involved in such a meaningful celebration. I should have known better. The night of the party, I arrived early to check on the setup and found Vanessa already there, rearranging everything. The slideshow I'd created was gone, replaced with one she'd made. I pulled it up on the laptop connected to the projector and felt my stomach drop. 47 photos spanning our entire relationship, and I appeared in maybe 8 of them. The rest were all of Diane alone, or with Vanessa and their friend group. Our wedding photos had been cropped to feature just Diane in her dress. Our honeymoon pictures showed only her on the beach. Even photos from the night I proposed had been edited to remove me from the frame. I confronted Vanessa in the empty hallway outside the main room, my hands shaking with rage I'd suppressed for years. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Why do you keep pretending I don't exist?" She looked at me with this calm, almost pitying expression, like I was a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. "I'm not pretending anything," she said. "I'm just showing Diane the way her life could have been, the way it should have been if she hadn't settled for someone so ordinary. You're not special," she continued. "You're not interesting or ambitious or worthy of her. You're just there, taking up space in a life that was supposed to be extraordinary. And someday she's going to realize that, and you'll be gone, and everything will go back to the way it should be." I asked if Diane knew she felt this way. Vanessa smiled. "Diane knows exactly who you are," she said. "Why do you think she never defends you when I edit you out? She sees what I see. She just hasn't admitted it to herself yet." The party was starting. I could hear people arriving, hear Diane's laugh echoing from the main room. I had maybe 5 minutes to decide what to do. I could go out there and expose Vanessa in front of everyone, show them the original photos and explain what she'd done. But I knew how that would look, knew I'd come across as petty and paranoid, making a scene at my own anniversary party. Or I could let it go one more time, swallow my pride, and pretend everything was fine. That's what I'd been doing for 10 years. What was one more night? I walked back into the venue and found Diane surrounded by guests, radiant in the dress she'd spent months choosing. Vanessa stood next to her like a guardian, one arm draped over Diane's shoulders, already controlling the narrative of the evening. I grabbed a drink from the bar and positioned myself by the windows, away from the crowd. That's when I noticed Owen standing in the same corner, holding a beer and staring at his phone with the expression of someone who desperately wished he was anywhere else. Owen was Vanessa's husband, though you'd never know it from the way she treated him. They'd been married about as long as Diane and I. But in all that time, I'd maybe had 3 real conversations with him. He was always there at the gatherings, always quiet and polite, but somehow separate from everything. I'd never thought much about it before. Now, watching him avoid the crowd the same way I was, I wondered if we had more in common than I'd realized. I walked over and stood next to him by the windows. "Hell of a party," I said. He looked up from his phone, startled, like he'd forgotten anyone could see him. "Yeah," he said. "Your wife looks happy." I followed his gaze to where Diane and Vanessa were posing for photos, their heads tilted together, perfect smiles frozen in place. "She does," I agreed. "Vanessa made a slideshow," Owen said after a moment. "I saw it when I was helping her load it onto the laptop yesterday." He took a long drink of his beer. "You weren't in most of the photos." "I know," I said. "She edited me out." Owen's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across his face. "She does that to me too," he said quietly. "Every single photo on her Instagram, every story she tells about our life together, I'm not in them. She talks about our house like she bought it herself, our vacations like she traveled alone, our accomplishments like I had nothing to do with them." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, years of accumulated frustration finally finding words. "Last month we went to Italy for our anniversary. She posted maybe 50 photos. I'm in 2 of them, and only because random strangers took the pictures and I couldn't be cropped out without it being obvious. I thought I was going crazy, thinking it was just me being paranoid." "But you're saying she does this to you too?" I nodded. "For 10 years, every photo, every story, every memory. I don't exist in her version of events." Owen leaned back against the wall. "My therapist says it's a control thing. She needs to be the center of every narrative, and people like us are threats to that. We're evidence that her friends have full lives outside of her, that they chose someone else to build a future with." We stood there in silence for a while, watching our wives laugh with their friends, watching Vanessa orchestrate the evening like a director managing her favorite scene. The slideshow started playing on the projection screen, and I watched my own life unfold without me in it. Diane hiking in Colorado, Diane at a concert, Diane celebrating her master's degree, Diane surrounded by friends at countless parties. Each image carefully curated to suggest a vibrant, fulfilling life that I'd apparently played no role in creating. When our wedding photo appeared, the one where Vanessa had cropped me out entirely, I heard Owen inhale sharply next to me. "That's sociopathic," he said. "That's your wedding day." "I know," I said, "but Diane doesn't see it. She thinks I'm overreacting, that Vanessa just has a specific vision for her photos." Owen pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "She told Diane that I'm holding her back from career opportunities, that I'm too comfortable with mediocrity. I found the text thread last month when Vanessa left her iPad at our place. He showed me the screen, and I felt sick reading the messages. The texts went back months, maybe years. Vanessa systematically undermining Owen in every conversation, planting seeds of doubt about his worth, his intelligence, his contribution to their marriage. And it wasn't just about Owen. There were similar threads about me, about how I was dragging Diane down, limiting her potential, keeping her trapped in a boring suburban existence when she could be doing something extraordinary. "How do you know about the texts about me?" I asked. "Because she sends the exact same messages about you to my wife that she sends about me to yours," Owen said. I checked her sent folder. She's been running a parallel campaign, turning both of them against us slowly enough that they don't notice it's happening. He looked at me directly for the first time. "We need to do something about this. We can't keep letting her erase us." "What do you suggest?" I asked. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "We make ourselves impossible to ignore. We document everything. We gather evidence, and then we show everyone exactly who Vanessa really is." We started that night. Owen had access to Vanessa's cloud storage, all the original photos she'd taken over the years before editing them. He downloaded everything, organized it by date, created side-by-side comparisons, showing the before and after versions. I went through my own archives, finding every instance where I'd been cropped out, every story where my contributions had been attributed to someone else. We built a timeline spanning a decade, a comprehensive record of systematic erasure. But we needed more than just photos. We needed witnesses, people who'd seen what Vanessa was doing and stayed quiet about it. Owen suggested we start with his brother, Liam, who'd been documenting Vanessa's behavior for years in his personal journal. Liam had never liked Vanessa, had warned Owen not to marry her, but he'd kept his observations private out of respect for his brother's choices. Now, with permission to share what he'd seen, Liam provided detailed accounts of gatherings where Vanessa had deliberately excluded Owen and me, conversations where she'd manipulated narratives, moments where her mask had slipped and her true intentions showed. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew it wouldn't matter unless we could get Diane to actually look at it. She'd spent 10 years dismissing my concerns, explaining away every instance of Vanessa's cruelty as misunderstanding or coincidence. Why would now be different? Owen had the same problem with his wife. They'd both chosen their friendship with Vanessa over their marriages, had invested so much in believing she was a good person that admitting the truth would mean confronting their own complicity in our suffering. We needed something that would force them to see, something so undeniable that they couldn't look away. That opportunity came 3 weeks later when Vanessa announced she was throwing a celebration dinner for Diane's promotion at work. She'd be handling all the planning, naturally, and wanted it to be a surprise. The invitation list she circulated included everyone from their college friend group, but my name was notably absent. When I asked Diane about it, she said Vanessa probably just forgot to add me. It's her best friend's celebration, not yours, I said, and I'm not invited. Diane looked uncomfortable. I'm sure it was an oversight, she said. I'll mention it to her. She never did. The dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening at an upscale restaurant downtown. I spent that week working with Owen, planning our response. We'd both been erased from a celebration that should have included us, both treated as irrelevant to our wives' lives, so we decided to make ourselves relevant in a way Vanessa couldn't ignore. We booked the private room next to where Vanessa's dinner would be held. We invited everyone who'd been systematically excluded from her events over the years, everyone who'd noticed her patterns of manipulation and control. We created a presentation, not vindictive or cruel, just factual. Side-by-side photos showing the original images and Vanessa's edited versions, screenshots of her text messages undermining us. Testimonials from friends who'd witnessed her behavior. We titled it, The Art of Erasure, a Decade of Systematic Exclusion, and sent calendar invites to everyone, scheduled for the exact same time as Vanessa's celebration. We included a note. If you've ever felt invisible or excluded, if you've ever wondered why you're not in the photos or the stories, this presentation will explain everything. The response was immediate and overwhelming. More than 30 people confirmed they'd attend, many sharing their own experiences with Vanessa's exclusion tactics. Some had been cropped from photos, others had been written out of shared memories. Several mentioned feeling gaslit when they'd tried to address it, being told they were too sensitive or imagining things. The pattern was so much bigger than just Owen and me. Vanessa had been doing this to everyone who threatened her position as the center of attention, anyone who might take focus away from her carefully curated image. And all these people had stayed quiet, suffered in isolation, assumed they were the only ones who saw it. Now they were ready to speak up. The night of the dinner arrived. I told Diane I had a work commitment and couldn't make Vanessa's celebration. She was disappointed but not surprised. You've been distant lately, she said. Is everything okay between us? I don't know anymore, I told her honestly. I think we need to have a serious conversation soon, but not tonight. Tonight is about your promotion. Enjoy it. I met Owen at the restaurant 2 hours before the dinner started. We set up the presentation in our private room, tested the projector, made sure every piece of evidence was organized and accessible. People started arriving early, gathering in small groups, sharing stories. A woman named Caroline talked about how Vanessa had edited her out of her own birthday party photos. A man named Stephen described being systematically excluded from group trips, despite being part of the friend circle for years. Liam shared observations from his journal, specific instances where he'd watched Vanessa manipulate situations to marginalize people. The room filled with quiet anger, the kind that comes from realizing you've been gaslit into doubting your own perceptions. We could hear Vanessa's party starting next door, could hear the laughter and conversation filtering through the walls. At exactly 7:30, I started the presentation. The first slide showed Diane and me on our wedding day, the original photo where we stood together at the altar. The second slide showed Vanessa's edited version, where I'd been removed entirely, leaving just Diane in her dress against an empty background. The room went silent. I explained what we'd discovered, how Vanessa had spent years systematically erasing Owen and me from our own lives, from our own memories, how she'd manipulated our wives into seeing us as less than we were, planting doubts, undermining our worth, slowly isolating them from everyone who might challenge her control. Owen took over, showing the text messages, the coordinated campaign to turn Diane and his wife against us. Then we opened the floor to others who wanted to share their experiences. The stories poured out, each one adding another layer to the pattern we'd uncovered. Vanessa wasn't just erasing Owen and me, she was erasing everyone. Anyone who got too close to her inner circle, anyone who might dilute her influence, anyone who represented a competing relationship. She'd been doing it for years, maybe decades, and she'd gotten away with it because she was good at making people doubt themselves. But now, with 30 witnesses in a room comparing notes, the pattern was undeniable. Someone asked what we planned to do with this information. Show them, I said. All of them. Tonight. We didn't have to go to them. They came to us. Halfway through our presentation, Diane appeared in the doorway of our private room. Her face was pale, confused. Someone from Vanessa's dinner had seen our event listed on the restaurant's private room schedule and mentioned it. Diane had come to investigate, expecting maybe a work function or a coincidental gathering. Instead, she found 30 people watching a slideshow that documented her best friend's decade-long manipulation campaign. What is this? She asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The truth," I said. "Everything I've been trying to tell you for 10 years. She walked further into the room, her eyes fixed on the projection screen where her own wedding photo stared back at her, both versions side by side. "Vanessa did this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Owen answered. He was standing near the front, his own evidence ready to present. "She's been doing it to all of us. Slowly erasing anyone who threatens her control over you and my wife, making us question our own worth until we disappear entirely." Diane pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I need to call Vanessa," she said. "She needs to explain this." "She's next door," I told her. "At your celebration dinner, the one I wasn't invited to." Diane looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, and the recognition in her eyes was devastating. "You weren't invited because Vanessa told me you had a work conflict," she said slowly. "She said you'd told her directly that you couldn't make it." I felt the familiar weight of Vanessa's manipulation settling over us again. "I never spoke to Vanessa about tonight," I said. "I told you I had a work commitment because I knew if I told you what I was really doing, you'd try to stop me. You'd defend her the way you've defended her every time I've brought this up." Diane's face crumpled. "I didn't know," she said. "All this time, I thought you were being paranoid. I thought you were jealous of my friendship with Vanessa. I thought you couldn't handle that I had a life outside our marriage." "You do have a life outside our marriage," I said. "You have work and friends and interests and ambitions. But Vanessa made you think I was threatened by those things when really I was just trying to survive being systematically erased from your memory." Owen's wife appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the same whispered conversation that had brought Diane. Her name was Rebecca, and she looked exactly like Diane had moments ago, confused and disoriented and starting to understand something terrible. Owen showed her the text messages, the evidence of Vanessa's manipulation. Rebecca read through them in silence, her hands trembling. "She's been telling me you're inadequate," she said finally. "For years. Little comments here and there about how you're not ambitious enough, not social enough, not worthy of the life we've built together. And I believed her because she's my best friend. Because I trusted her. Because she's never been anything but supportive to my face." Owen's expression was hard. "Supportive people don't spend years trying to convince you to leave your spouse. Supportive people don't edit your partner out of your shared memories. Supportive people don't gaslight you into doubting someone you love." Rebecca looked like she might be sick. "Where is she?" she asked. Diane pointed toward the wall separating our rooms. "Next door." Celebrating a promotion she probably tried to take credit for planning. The confrontation happened in the hallway between the two private rooms. Vanessa had come looking for Diane and Rebecca, confused about why they'd disappeared from her carefully planned celebration. She found them standing outside our presentation room, their faces streaked with tears, their phones clutched in their hands, showing evidence of her betrayal. Behind them, 30 witnesses filed out into the hallway, a silent chorus of everyone she'd erased. Vanessa's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally, defiance. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Whatever lies they've been telling you, whatever manipulation they've orchestrated, you have to see it for what it is. They're trying to turn you against me because they can't handle that you have meaningful relationships outside your marriages." Diane held up her phone, showing the side-by-side wedding photos. "You cropped my husband out of our wedding picture," she said. Her voice was steady, but there were tears running down her face. "You've been editing him out of my life for 10 years, making me forget he was there, making me doubt his worth. Why would you do that?" Vanessa's mask cracked. "Because you were supposed to be extraordinary," she said. "We were supposed to build something incredible together, you and me and Rebecca. We were supposed to be the ones who didn't settle, who didn't let ourselves get trapped in boring, ordinary lives. But then you met him, and she met Owen. And suddenly, you were talking about mortgages and family plans and settling down. You chose ordinary over extraordinary. I was just trying to remind you of who you were supposed to be. Who I was supposed to be," Diane repeated. "Or who you wanted me to be. There's a difference." Vanessa looked around at the crowd gathering in the hallway, at all the faces of people she'd excluded and erased. "You're all so predictable," she said. "So desperate to be victims. None of you understand what it takes to maintain excellence, to refuse to compromise your vision of what life should be. I never erased anyone. I just chose not to celebrate mediocrity." Owen stepped forward. "You didn't just choose not to celebrate us," he said. "You actively tried to destroy our relationships. You spent years manipulating our wives into seeing us as obstacles to their potential. You edited us out of photos and memories and stories. You gaslit us into believing we were the problem. That's not refusing to celebrate mediocrity. That's sociopathic control." The word hung in the air between them. Vanessa's face flushed red, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. "You want to talk about control?" she said. "Let's talk about how you're standing here with 30 people you've clearly manipulated into supporting your narrative. How you've spent weeks planning this ambush, coordinating stories, building a case against me. That's not honesty. That's a witch hunt." Caroline spoke up from the crowd. "You cropped me out of my own birthday party photos." Stephen added, You told everyone I couldn't make the ski trip when you never actually invited me. Liam pulled out his journal. I have 7 years of observations documenting your pattern of exclusion and manipulation. This isn't a witch hunt. It's a reckoning. More voices joined in, each person sharing their specific experience with Vanessa's erasure. The stories overlapped and interlocked, forming an undeniable pattern. Vanessa had been systematically removing anyone who might compete for attention or loyalty, carefully curating a social circle where she remained the unchallenged center. And she'd done it so gradually, so subtly, that most people hadn't realized what was happening until they compared notes. Diane was crying openly now, 10 years of manipulation finally coming into focus. I defended you, she said to Vanessa. Every time he told me you were excluding him, every time he showed me evidence of what you were doing, I took your side. I told him he was imagining things. I told him he was being too sensitive. I chose you over my husband again and again because I trusted you. Because I thought our friendship was sacred. Vanessa's expression shifted again, this time to something almost pleading. It is sacred, she said. That's why I was trying to protect you. He's not good enough for you, Diane. Neither of them are good enough for either of you. You're both brilliant and accomplished and destined for greatness, and you're wasting it on men who will never match your potential. I was trying to wake you up before you wasted your entire lives. Rebecca's voice was ice. You don't get to decide what constitutes a wasted life, she said. You don't get to manipulate us into doubting the people we love just because they don't fit your vision of what we should want. That's not friendship. That's ownership. And I'm done being owned. The celebration dinner Vanessa had planned never happened. The guests from her party had filtered into the hallway, drawn by the commotion, and now stood watching as a decade of carefully constructed lies unraveled. Someone had started recording on their phone. The video would be all over social media by morning, Vanessa's mask of perfection finally ripped away to reveal the controlling narcissist underneath. She looked around at the assembled crowd, at Diane and Rebecca crying, at Owen and me standing together with our evidence displayed on the projection screen behind us. Her carefully curated world was collapsing in real time. Every relationship she'd manipulated now scrutinizing her with new clarity. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Diane called after her, but Vanessa didn't stop. The door swung shut behind her, and she was gone. The hallway erupted in conversation, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. But I only cared about Diane. She was standing against the wall, her phone clutched in her hand, staring at the wedding photo still displayed on the screen. I walked over to her carefully. Are you okay? I asked. She looked up at me with red, devastated eyes. No, she said. I'm not. I let her do this to you. I let her erase you from our life together. I chose her version of reality over yours for 10 years. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But it was her fault, at least partially. She'd made the choice to believe Vanessa every time, to dismiss my concerns, to prioritize a toxic friendship over her marriage. I was a victim of Vanessa's manipulation, but I was also a victim of Diane's willingness to participate in that manipulation. I need time, I said finally. Time to figure out if this marriage is something I still want. Time to decide if I can trust you again, after you spent a decade not trusting me. Diane nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she said. I don't know if I can forgive myself for this. You don't have to forgive yourself, I said. You have to figure out why you were so willing to believe I wasn't worth defending, why you chose a friendship with someone who actively tried to destroy us over a marriage with someone who loved you. Until you understand that, I don't think we can move forward. I walked away then, leaving her in the hallway surrounded by the wreckage of her best friendship. Owen caught up with me in the parking lot. Where are you going? He asked. Honestly, I don't know. A hotel, maybe. Somewhere quiet where I can think. Owen and I met for coffee 3 days later at a place neither of our wives knew about. We'd both been staying in hotels, giving ourselves space to process everything that had happened. Rebecca had called him dozens of times, sent hundreds of texts, all of them variations on the same theme. Apologizing, explaining, begging for another chance. Diane had done the same to me. I'd responded to a few, told her I needed more time, refused to come home until I was ready. The truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. 10 years of systematic erasure didn't just disappear because the perpetrator had been exposed. The damage was done. I'd spent a decade doubting my own worth, questioning whether I belonged in my wife's life, slowly becoming invisible even to myself. That kind of psychological harm doesn't heal quickly. Owen looked as exhausted as I felt. Rebecca wants to go to couples therapy, he said. She's found 3 different therapists and sent me their credentials. I think she's trying to prove she's willing to do the work. Is she, I asked, willing to do the work? He shrugged. I don't know. She's willing to perform willingness. Whether that translates into actual change remains to be seen. We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching people pass by outside the window. Normal people with normal problems, none of them dealing with a decade of orchestrated psychological manipulation. I kept thinking about what Vanessa had said in the hallway, about how we'd chosen ordinary over extraordinary. Maybe she was right. Maybe Diane and Rebecca had wanted extraordinary lives, and Owen and I represented the mundane reality of marriage and mortgages and shared Netflix accounts. Maybe we were the compromise they'd made, and Vanessa was just the voice of their suppressed regrets. "You're spiraling," Owen said, pulling me out of my thoughts. "I can see it on your face." "I'm just wondering if she was right," I admitted. "Vanessa, maybe we are mediocre. Maybe we were holding them back." Owen leaned forward. "Here's what I know," he said. "I'm a good husband. I support Rebecca's career. I share household responsibilities. I show up emotionally and physically in our relationship. I'm not extraordinary, but I'm not mediocre either. I'm just a person trying to build a life with someone I love. If that's not good enough for her, if she needs extraordinary instead of real, then we're incompatible. But that's not a failure on my part. That's just two people wanting different things." His words settled something in me. I'd been so focused on Vanessa's judgment, on proving I was worthy of Diane's life, that I'd forgotten to ask whether Diane was worthy of mine, whether a marriage where I was constantly defending my existence was one I actually wanted to save. My phone buzzed. Another text from Diane asking if we could talk. I showed it to Owen. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. "Eventually," I said, "but not yet. I'm not ready to have that conversation when I don't know what I want from it." Owen nodded. Rebecca keeps saying she didn't know what Vanessa was doing, but she did know. Every time I brought up feeling excluded or erased, she knew. She chose not to see it. That's almost worse than the original manipulation, because it means I was living with someone who watched me suffer and decided it wasn't important enough to address. We spent the next hour talking through our options: stay and try to rebuild, leave and start over. Some middle ground where we separated temporarily to see if either relationship was salvageable. None of the options felt right. Every path forward required a level of forgiveness I wasn't sure I could access. The story went viral over the next week. Someone from the restaurant had posted the video of the confrontation, and it exploded across social media platforms. Vanessa became a cautionary tale, a symbol of toxic friendship and narcissistic manipulation. Think pieces were written. Psychologists analyzed her behavior. People shared their own stories of being erased by friends who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Diane and Rebecca both deactivated their social media accounts, unable to handle the scrutiny. I watched from a distance as the narrative took on a life of its own, as Owen and I became minor celebrities in the story of Vanessa's downfall. We gave one interview to a podcast that focused on emotional manipulation in relationships. Mostly, we talked about the patterns we'd noticed, the red flags we'd missed, the importance of trusting your own perceptions even when everyone around you says you're wrong. The interview got 3 million downloads. People started recognizing us on the street. It was surreal being visible after spending so long being invisible. But it also felt hollow. The public vindication didn't heal the private wounds. I was still living in a hotel. I still didn't know if I wanted to go home. Diane finally cornered me at my office 3 weeks after the confrontation. She'd been waiting in the lobby, and when I came down for lunch, she stood up and blocked my path. "We need to talk," she said. Her eyes were red, her face drawn. She looked like she'd aged years and weeks. "Not here," I said. "Fine. Anywhere," she replied. "Just please talk to me." We ended up in a park 2 blocks away, sitting on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks fought over breadcrumbs tourists were throwing. It reminded me of our early dating days, when we'd spend Saturday mornings in this exact spot, planning our future together. That future felt impossibly distant now. "I've been in therapy," Diane said, "individual and group, trying to understand how I let this happen, how I chose Vanessa over you for so long." "What have you learned?" I asked. She looked at the pond, not at me. That I was scared of being ordinary. That Vanessa represented this idea of an extraordinary life, and you represented reality. And reality felt like failure. So I let her convince me you were the problem instead of confronting my own fears about who I was becoming. I'd expected excuses or justifications. The raw honesty caught me off guard. "Go on," I said. Diane took a shaky breath. "My therapist asked me when I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a symbol." I didn't have an answer. But looking back, I think it was gradual. Every time Vanessa made a comment about you being too comfortable or too ordinary, she was really asking me if I was okay with being those things too. And I wasn't. I wanted to be extraordinary. I wanted to be the person who did extraordinary things. And instead, I was just a person with a career and a marriage and a normal life. You made it impossible to pretend I was anything other than that. So I let Vanessa erase you because erasing you meant I could still believe the fantasy. Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know you might never forgive me. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see how I failed you. And I see that extraordinary isn't a destination. It's just a story we tell ourselves to avoid appreciating what we already have." I sat with that for a long moment. The apology was real. The understanding was genuine. But understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the hurt. "I don't know if I can come back from this," I said finally. 10 years is a long time to be made invisible. 10 years of having my worth questioned, my contributions ignored, my presence treated as negotiable. That does something to a person. It changes how you see yourself. I've spent the last month trying to remember who I was before Vanessa started erasing me, and I can't. That version of me is gone. So even if I forgive you, even if we try to rebuild, I'm not sure the person you'd be rebuilding with is the same person you married. Diane was crying silently. I know, she whispered. I know I destroyed something irreplaceable. I just needed to tell you that I finally understand what it cost you. What I cost you. We sat there as the sun started to set, two people who'd promised forever to each other now sitting in the wreckage of that promise. Finally, Diane stood. I'll respect whatever you decide, she said. If you want to try therapy, I'll show up. If you want a divorce, I won't fight it. You deserve to choose what comes next. She walked away, leaving me alone on the bench. Owen opened his coffee shop 6 months later. He'd been planning it for years, had the business model ready, the financing lined up, just waiting for the right moment. The confrontation with Vanessa had been the catalyst he needed to finally take the leap. He called it visible, a deliberate reclamation of what had been stolen from us. The shop was small but perfectly designed, with exposed brick walls and huge windows that flooded everything with natural light. We hung photos on the walls, all the original versions Vanessa had edited, blown up large with captions explaining what had been removed and why. It was part coffee shop, part art installation, part testimony to the power of refusing to stay invisible. I helped design the space, contributed some of my own work, found purpose in building something that celebrated existence instead of erasing it. Rebecca came to the opening. She and Owen were in counseling, working through the damage, but they weren't living together yet. She stood in front of one of the photo installations for a long time, staring at a picture of Owen that Vanessa had cropped her out of entirely. I should have seen it, she said quietly. I should have protected him. But now she was showing up, doing the work. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. Diane came too, though we weren't back together. We were in what our therapist called structured separation, living apart but meeting regularly to talk through our history and decide if we wanted a future. Some days I thought maybe we could rebuild. Other days I knew the foundation was too damaged to support anything real. But I'd learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. We were closing up the shop after the opening night celebration when Owen's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then went pale. What is it? I asked. That was Liam, he said. Vanessa's been arrested. For what? Fraud. Apparently she's been embezzling from her company for years. Creative accounting to fund the lifestyle she needed to maintain her image of perfection. They found evidence on her work computer during a routine audit. She's facing federal charges. We stood there in the empty shop, surrounded by photos of all the people she'd tried to erase, processing this final piece of information. Of course, she'd been committing fraud. Her entire life had been fraud. The perfect friend, the successful professional, the center of every social circle, all of it constructed on lies and manipulation and stolen resources. Diane and I had our final therapy session a year after the confrontation. We'd done the work, processed the trauma, understood the patterns that had brought us to that breaking point. But understanding isn't the same as healing. We sat across from each other in the therapist's office and finally admitted what we'd both known for months. We were done. Not because we didn't care about each other, not because we couldn't forgive, but because the foundation of our marriage had been built on her willingness to overlook my erasure, and you can't rebuild on that. We signed the divorce papers 3 weeks later. It was amicable, splitting assets and making arrangements with a maturity we probably should have brought to the marriage itself. At the end, sitting in the lawyer's office with our signatures drying on the final documents, Diane looked at me and said, I hope you find someone who sees you from the beginning, someone who never makes you fight to exist. I hope so too, I said, and I hope you figure out that ordinary is just another word for real. That extraordinary is exhausting, that the life we had could have been enough if you'd let it be. Owen and Rebecca didn't make it either. The counseling helped them understand what had gone wrong, but understanding wasn't enough to bridge the years of accumulated resentment. They divorced 6 months after Diane and I did. Rebecca moved across the country for a new job, a fresh start somewhere Vanessa's ghost couldn't haunt her. Owen stayed, expanded Visible into a second location, built a community of people who'd been made to feel invisible and were reclaiming their visibility. We became business partners, best friends, brothers in the specific way that comes from surviving the same war. People still recognized us sometimes, from the video or the podcast or the story that had taken on mythical proportions online. But we weren't defined by what Vanessa had done to us anymore. We were defined by what we'd built after. Visible became more than a coffee shop. It became a space where people could share their stories of being erased, where manipulation and gaslighting were named and confronted, where visibility was celebrated as the radical act it truly was. Vanessa went to prison for 7 years. I didn't follow the case closely, didn't attend the trial, didn't need the closure of watching her face consequences. The consequences she'd already faced, the public exposure and loss of everything she'd built, felt sufficient. Besides, I'd learned that revenge doesn't heal you. Building something new does. Creating a life where you're visible, valued, and seen. That's the only real victory. Owen and I stood outside Visible on a random Monday evening, watching people through the windows, all of them engaged in real conversations, present in their own lives, refusing to be erased. We did this, Owen said. We made ourselves impossible to ignore. Yeah, I said. We did. And somewhere, in all those years of Vanessa's cruelty, she'd accidentally taught us the most important lesson. That being seen isn't something someone else grants you. It's something you claim for yourself. So we claimed it, loudly and permanently, in a coffee shop called Visible, where everyone's story matters and no one disappears. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.